Rishi, why don't we just start? I think Shweta will join. It's repeating history like yesterday. Uh, so, Rishi, welcome you to the session today. It's on. We'd love to discuss like unpacking enterprise software buying priorities in the current environment with you and Shweta as soon as she joins. And I also welcome our audience as well. And a quick thing for the audience before we start the discussion: if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to add them in the session chat box on the right, and we'll try to cover as many as possible in the end. All right, Rishi, I'll kick off by it'll be great to start by introducing yourself. I would love to spend a few minutes on your background, journey to your current company, and your role. And if you could describe your role as well, that would be super helpful.
Sure. Thank you, Purva. Thanks for having me.
And we have Shweta as well.
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
I'll just give a quick introduction. So again, thank you for having me. Hopefully, we'll be able to overcome some of the unique that this virtual event presents. So I work for AT&T. I work in the office of the CTO for the company. My focus is around transformation, and this is part of a kind of a multi-year transformation journey that we just started earlier this year. That has to do with transforming our think of our enterprise IT landscape across a large organization and evolving it into a that is public cloud first and heavy reliance on SaaS. And so that's going to be a pretty marked departure from a lot of large enterprise landscapes that a lot of you are familiar with, which is a lot of homegrown custom apps that have been built of, let's just put it, varying vintages, stuff that's accumulated with what I like to refer to as accidental architecture. So how do we evolve that into an environment that can take advantage of what public cloud and SaaS has to offer? So I've been in this role for about the last 10 to 12 months, actually. Prior to this, and this is where I met Apurva, I used to run our ecosystem and innovation organization, which was responsible for surfacing and de-risking new technology innovations from the external market into the company itself. And that served as the interface to the broader startup and venture capital community across the globe. So I ran 6 innovation centers for the company. 4 were in the US, 1 was in Tel Aviv, Israel, and the other one was in Mexico City. And the waterfront of technologies that we were interested and worked on spanned anything and everything from what you would expect a regular telco to be interested in, things like 5G and networking and security. But it kind of went all the way to anything and everything around AI, machine learning, mixed reality, autonomous vehicles, UAVs. We also working with Caltech around quantum networking as well. I've spent actually most of my career outside of AT&T. So I had an extensive stint in consulting, worked at Ernst & Consulting for almost a decade. I've also spent some time working at Motorola and Nokia as well. But I think most of my background is what I would call the intersection of technology and outcomes. So that's a little bit about me. Apurva, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Rishi. And I think we have Shweta now. Shweta, we were just starting off, so you've joined at the right time. If you could spend a few minutes on your background, journey to your current role, and also describe your current role a bit, that'll be super helpful to start off.
Fantastic. Thanks, Apurv. I was laughing that, one of the challenges that I see with some of the technology applications is the reliance on internet. So I clearly gave you an example before we even started here. But a little bit about myself. It's great to be here. Shweta Manyar. I started my career out as a medical school student and have spent many years in research at organizations such as Scripps Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic. And prior to or after that, worked in a nonprofit biotech or biomedical biotech startup looking at how do we commercialize ideas coming out of hospital systems, research institutes. So spent quite a bit of time spinning out a few medical device companies and licensing to the Medtronics and Strykers and Intuitive Surgicals of the world. And then most prior to Google, spent time at Roche or Genentech, depending on who you speak with, really looking at how we bring technology into the organization, and had a variety of roles at that time. So all that led me to where I am now here at Google Cloud, which is a role which is leading our healthcare and life sciences solution strategy, particularly focused on the life sciences side. So really looking at what does the industry need, how do we bring the Google technology and meld that together? And I'm sure we'll speak a bit about it today, but it's a very, very unique time for life sciences, I think even prior to this year. So I'm really, really, really keen to talk about some of the things that Google's doing. And I'll have to share a quick story. Is I remember sitting on the Genentech side in my office, maybe about 5 or 8 years ago, chuckling when Google came out with a press release about with contact lenses with Novartis. So, and I thought they don't know what they're doing. They're gonna, it's gonna take a few years before they can get through some regulatory hurdles. And so it's really neat to be on this side and see how Google is looking at this industry. And there's a handful of other industries that I think are very ripe for, I don't like to use the word disruption, but very interesting time for some of these industries. So thanks for having me here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll quickly start with some context, and then we'll dig into like some questions for each of you. At the beginning of the pandemic in around like Feb or March, enterprises like got into this mode of like rethinking their priorities and also understanding what their needs should look like. When they went fully remote, and they continue to be fully remote right now for an unknown amount of time or duration. However, in the last few months, enterprise stakeholders have not only remodeled their priorities, but have also accelerated the adoption of technology across the enterprise stack. And I would say right from the infrastructure layer to the application layer across business verticals. And verticals like healthcare, financial services, telecom, cybersecurity, et cetera, have seen a ton of demand and are responding to the sudden surge in market demand as well. And it's important to kind of meet this demand, and the best way to do that is obviously adopting technology. That's how you kind of build personalized and differentiated experiences. And you both have been in two of these verticals, Vishy on the telecom side and Shweta on the healthcare side. So I'd love to dig into the first topic, which is understanding the meaning of digital transformation, which like many enterprises talk about. So Vishy, I'll kick off the discussion with you. Many folks might not realize how diversified AT&T is. AT&T is kind of the fifth largest retailer in the US, largest pay TV provider. I think you guys acquired Time Warner as well, which gave you HBO and CNN and like a wide array of networking solutions across the board. Mm-hmm. What does digital transformation mean to you at AT&T as an entire entity itself across these multiple business units? And what are the guiding business priorities at an organizational level that are informing digital transformation, especially over the last 9 months once the pandemic hit?
Yeah, so kind of at the outset, I think you touched on something which is like, we're so big, so I'll kind of keep my answer to the part of the organization that I belong to. The part of the organization that you said, came through the Time Warner acquisition is under an organization called Warner Media. So that has the kind of, HBO, the CNN, Turner, Warner Brothers, etc. Obviously, the biggest transformation is something that's been ongoing in the industry, which is around OTT and direct to consumer. On is kind of, if you think about it, it's the one minus Warner Media part of AT&T, which is all the traditional, what you would think of as the classic telco. So if you think about us as a company, the two chunks of businesses we have inside of the kind of the telecommunications organization, one is a large consumer business and one is a large enterprise or a B2B business. On the consumer business, to think of three main offerings that we provide. One is just wireless and mobility. The second is around broadband. And the third is around pay TV, as you talked about. And then on the enterprise or the B2B side, that's a pretty sizable chunk of our business as well. That started out way back, originally just providing et cetera, IoT, all of that. From a digital transformation standpoint, what it means for us is the way we interact with our customers has evolved, continues to evolve pretty dramatically. So on the mobility side and the fiber side, all aspects of the customer lifecycle continue to be impacted by digital. So whether it's the kind of the acquisition part of the customer lifecycle, whether it's the ongoing kind of nurturing part of it, the kind of the onboarding, the kind of the ongoing support. How can we apply digital technologies in a meaningful and a surgical fashion at the scale at which we operate? So 130 plus million mobile subscribers. So applying that kind of intelligence across that entire business. The reality is that pay TV and HBO Max from us. So kind of digital transformation gets to getting that kind of discipline across the customer lifecycle, but then also to get to the data underneath all of these interactions that are happening between a customer and different facets of your brand, different facets of your product portfolio, and stitching that together in a meaningful and a very personal and a very relevant experience for that particular customer at that point in time, regardless of the channel that they're interacting with us on. So that's on the consumer side. By and large, I would say the same things apply even on the enterprise side, because I think that's the part that we see that's happened. It's a secular thing that's happened. The consumer experience has raised the bar for even what the enterprise experience looks like. And so for us, anything and everything from how you order something as a business, as our enterprise customers expect, more and more that digital experience is something that people place an extremely high premium on, except that it has to be oriented towards the specific products and services that an enterprise buyer might be interested. But in terms of the same ease of engagement, zero friction, you need to know everything that I bought from you, right? And tell me, should I be doing anything better, different, etc. And don't wait for a once in a year interaction between the account team and me to kind of talk about other things we should be doing. So in some sense, the backbone of digital transformation for us is obviously manifested in how the experience changes, but then kind of underneath together all of the disparate kind of applications and pieces of infrastructure that we've accumulated over the past several decades and stitch them together in a meaningful fashion, but do that at a speed at which the competition is doing, the market is doing, and do it at a pace that customer needs and expectations are evolving.
Got it.
Yeah.
Super helpful. And obviously in the last 9 months, that pace has kind of gone through the roof, and that might have obviously changed the pace of transformation at your end. And we'll get into the specifics of that and the use cases around that. But Shweta, you've been on either side of the table as an exec across health systems as well as life sciences, Roche Genentech, and now selling Google Cloud to health execs and IT leaders. How has the idea of transformation shifted within health systems and pharma over the last 9 months? And how have those business priorities of whether it's like CIOs or CTOs and business leaders within pharma and life sciences changed over the last 9 months, in your opinion?
So I'm glad that you asked this question, because what you're getting at is, while it has changed, I don't think it's changed significantly in the last 9 months. What I'm actually seeing, Apoorv, is that it's sped up, right? I think some of the challenges or the the inadequacies have actually surfaced much faster. So I think now life sciences has stopped making a 2020 vision, and now everybody's talking about a 2030 vision. So I think that I'm going to maybe start from the business side, or we're seeing in the industry first. I think that there's three main challenges that are the reason why that these organizations are going through their digital transformation. I think one is we're seeing a below par scientific productivity in general, right? I think, this year with having a vaccine come out in 1 year, now 10 years to release a new therapy is not going to be the norm or acceptable anymore. I think we have increased customer expectations. And I think I'll speak a little bit more about this shortly, but what we're seeing is the life sciences industry is needing to adopt various forms of digital transformation in their organizations, because life sciences is shifting towards the type of transparency that is maybe historically seen on the retail side. And then we're also seeing, I'm also seeing a lot of cultural sclerosis, which is really just old ways of thinking. And this is, this is not how we do this. And we're a very different industry. We're a very regulated industry. And actually, life sciences is not the only regulated industry that exists. So one is we're seeing that the definition of a customer has shifted from a life sciences company. It's not selling only to the physician, right? Now you are thinking about the expectations from a end user perspective, be that a patient or a consumer, depending on what type of life sciences you're talking about. So there is the expectations have increased for new therapies, new devices, faster, and with the economies of scale that I think even Vishy alluded to within his realm. I think the scientific productivity I'd mentioned, right? It's flatlined in the last decade. Business operations are generally staying the same, and so there is a lot of, and again, like I said, this year really brought that to the surface. And then life sciences companies, and I can say this because I was there, they often rely on very traditional or traditional mental models, I would say, right? Traditional strategies. And now they're under the pressure to modernize some of these business processes to remain competitive. So I think while historically life sciences have been really much slower to adopt to new technologies, every large pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturer and distributor today has digital transformation as one of their key pillars. And so how they define that, of course, is going to be is somewhat different from organization to organization. But I think they're trying to adopt technologies because they now have an evolving role in this complex ecosystem of, it's not just pharma to physician, right? It is thinking about the regulators, the healthcare providers, the patients, the hospitals, the clinics, the fragmented data and interoperability challenges. And then of course, that's layered upon the privacy regulations that this industry has. So what we're seeing is with the digital transformation, this intelligent revolution, if you will, has reached life sciences now. And so now they're trying to think about how do they leverage digital technology to improve different patient outcomes, how they're better engaging with customers. Customers are defined both as the healthcare provider as well as the patient, and how they're using technology. So while all of that to say, I think prior healthcare and life sciences, the industry, you're trying to convince people to even think about cloud. I think now it's not about convincing cloud, right? I think now it's about what are you actually going to do? Thinking about hybrid cloud models. How are you going to derive the maximum insights with your existing data? It's not about buying or accessing additional data. It's about removing the silos with federated access. So there's a lot more that I could say here, but I'm gonna pause here for you, Apoorv.
No, you actually touched on a topic which is going to be my next segue, which is like as soon as you start talking about digital transformation or truly digitizing yourself, you start talking about cloud adoption as kind of the first pillar. And Shweta, healthcare has been highly regulated. It's a highly regulated space with large amounts of sensitive data. And it has taken a lot of effort for cloud providers to educate health systems and pharma companies regarding the benefits of cloud adoption. What's the current state of cloud adoption within healthcare, life sciences, and what are the typical reasons people are moving to the cloud? I think any real examples would be super helpful for like founders who are dialing in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that so I answered that a bit, right? It's not about it's less about convincing right now. It's more about thinking about what model that you're trying to use. Look, I've shared some of the challenges that we're seeing that the industry is having to think through. Like I had mentioned, 2020 brought across that challenge even more. I would be remiss if I didn't even talk about COVID and this year, the pandemic. While we were all trying to figure out, for example, while all industry supply chain efforts have come under scrutiny, I think that while we were trying to figure out where to get toilet paper and our next, some Lysol wipes, I think it also brought in that inadequacy of the supply chain, for example. So what's emerged is that visibility gap. This is, again, coming back to that concept of thinking about life sciences as a retail organization. So we're seeing a faster appetite to embrace digital and data and the use of this type of real-time information. So why people are, and then again, general comment here, but why people are thinking about the cloud, or why we're even, life sciences is now coming to us to really start thinking through their strategies, is the need for near real-time information, real visibility across their value chain. And again, this is what I'm making a comment on is not just for large organizations or small organizations. This is relatively the same. The data value chain is, how data travels in your company, but be that small or large, is relatively the same. Of course, it gets more complex as you get larger. But then the elasticity and the flexibility of usage. I think what we're also seeing is different organizations, particularly those that have been on-prem, have had challenges to react to this year because of elasticity and flexibility of their usage. So a lot of the conversations that we're having is around providing that flexibility. I think you had a couple of questions in there, Apoorv, so I want to make sure I'm answering all of them.
This is super helpful. And I think one of the interesting takeaways is think of healthcare as retail, think of the end user, think of those use cases, and the fact that you want to consume data and information as quickly as possible, which wasn't happening earlier, but it's become even more important today as people have accelerated the cloud adoption and technological adoption across the stack, which is super insightful. Vishy, in our past discussions, you mentioned that AT&T is taking a multi-cloud approach. What is the state of cloud adoption within AT&T, and how are different stakeholders, when you think of stakeholders, horizontal stakeholders, which is around functions around CTOs, CIOs, to verticalize BUs, since you are so diversified, how are they looking to adopt cloud in their own ways?
Yeah, I'd say I think in terms of cloud adoption, I think for us as an organization, I think mentally we are there. But in terms of where we are, I would probably equate it to we're probably, I don't know, using a baseball analogy, we're probably in the second inning, right? And a lot of it has to do with, I would say, I think, the reality is we are a brownfield, and so there is. Cloud adoption in a brownfield is an interesting exercise. I think we do have some pockets where we've gotten some traction and we've had success, but I think scaling it across the entire organization, across the entire kind of application portfolio is going to take some time. In terms of the internal stakeholders, I don't think, it's, you had me at hello kind of attitude, right? Which is like, yes, absolutely, we have to do this. But I think at the scale at which we operate, we are looking at cloud for fundamentally, I think Shweta touched on this, is I think the agility that the cloud provides. And to me, cloud adoption is just like another chapter of the whole core versus context kind of saga that's been happening in enterprises over the last several years. Because even for a company like AT&T, we pride ourselves on doing infrastructure at scale, but it's infrastructure of a different kind, right? And so I think there is a clear recognition of the fact that I think public cloud at the rate at which it evolves, at the speed at which innovation happens in terms of the range, the variety and the volume of the innovation that comes at us through kind of the cloud marketplace in general, that allows us to kind of get on the on-ramp of innovation much faster than trying to organically build a lot of that innovation. And so you can take scarce innovation dollars that you have as a corporation and put on something that's going to be truly differentiated, right? And I think so that's the lens that all of our stakeholders are looking at. Now, I think that needs to be balanced with, yes, we want to move fast, but we can't afford to break things, right, at the scale at which we operate. So that's the kind of the art and the science of how you scale for us cloud across the entire organization. So it's definitely not Like, do we have to convince people that you're right to go? No, that's done, long gone. It's how do you calibrate? Okay, how do you sequence it? Which parts do you go first? Which parts do you go later, etc. So that's what we're working through right now.
Got it. Super helpful. And I think, as I said, right, like cloud is kind of the first pillar, and then you kind of move beyond and thinking about it from the lens of like tech startups and founders. And I want to like also mention some questions that are coming in with the questions that I had around this topic. Rishi, AT&T has both internal needs as well as you mentioned that you have a huge distribution network due to your retail and B2B business. Could you talk a bit about your process of understanding the unmet needs across internal and external stakeholders that'll help you assess vendors or software vendors in more like a holistic way, that what could work for like all different kinds of stakeholders or a specific team? And what are like 3 core areas of opportunity for startup founders listening in today based on those unmet needs that you see across the organization?
So obviously at the scale at which we operate, the unmet needs are vast and varied, right? So I'm not going to say we've kind of cracked the code on kind of identifying and kind of cataloging all the unmet needs, right? So I think the way that we've driven the process within our company is that while I sit within one organization that's driving a corporate-wide transformation, we are large enough that the autonomous business units have their own technology organizations as well, right? Just for the speed that gives them. So a big part of identifying the unmet needs is having a collaborative kind of governance model where you're actually much tighter, because these are my technology peers in, say, the consumer business or the team that runs, designs and manages our kind of network, so to say. I have spent enough time working in those BUs that I have the personal relationships. So we have actually an ongoing cadence to actually walk through kind of what we are working on, what they're working on, where the unmet needs are. So it's not something, earth-shattering. It's just, I think a lot of these things is very much around relationship building and kind of getting complete transparency into what we're working on. I would say in terms of, top 2 or 3 areas of opportunity, if you think about our entire kind of estate of applications, if you will, across the company, right? Anything and everything from, CRM to billing to kind of network provisioning to inventory to all of the classic kind of IT operation stack. One of the things that we have to work through is we're not going to take the entire applications portfolio and move it to the cloud. Mm-hmm. We're going to use this opportunity to actually shut down a bunch of applications, right? So we have less of a surface area to actually transform, mm-hmm. right? So that's number one. What that leaves us with is, like I said, our applications span a variety of vintages. So there are ones that have been built in the last 3 to 5 years mm-hmm. that I would say are cloud native-ish. So there's actually very little work required to move them to the cloud. I think where we have challenges, and I think we will continue to have challenges, is, our applications were designed pretty much to work with on-prem data centers. Very well-established ways of actually applications interacting, the trust models from a security standpoint, et cetera. Now we get into an environment in which these applications are going to be in a multi-cloud environment, multi-SaaS environment, and a very small, I would call, vestigial footprint of on-prem. Mm-hmm. So and as we make that transition, traditional models of what I would call kind of operations have to evolve. Traditional models of how you handle the 4-hour triage call and operations. You and I have talked about this, Apurva. I mean, those are going to become inordinately more complicated unless you have very good observability, telemetry kind of capability built across your entire portfolio as you're transitioning to the cloud. But you can't do that. I mean, there's an opportunity to kind of, as you refactor these applications, to actually bring them in some sense into the 21st century and a kind of a cloud forward way. But we're always looking at ways to kind of make that better. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, if the outcome we want is part of the digital transformation is the customer experience. So the ability to actually, in some sense, tie the interaction that a customer might have on any of our channels all the way back to the systems of record and round trip, and to be able to, at a very granular level, if needed, figure out where the issue is, where the bottleneck is, right? So just basic observability, and then you can apply all of the AI and ML against it as to what constitutes anomalous behavior. And then wherever there are opportunities, without a human in the loop, to automatically kind of make those remediations, and then use high-priced talent to actually lean in and actually fix those things that require the human in the loop. Right? And to do it at scale. I think that's I would say that's probably the broad class of things that we kind of
got it. So observability, so that you're taking into account the complexity and downstream dependencies, but at the same time, I think you also like touched upon the triage, the call center piece of it, to make that more intelligent. So those are kind of the two themes that kind of stand out. And obviously observability is on the side of like the DevOps stack side of things.
Yes.
What about the application layer? Are there any things on the application layer that you're looking at actively?
I think applications, there's nothing surprising, right? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff we are working with and continue to work with around what I would call, conversational commerce, conversational AI, sentiment analysis from a call center perspective. And so I think all of that is relatively well understood, I would say. But I think the one thing that continues to be, and I think we are beginning to make some headway, but I think it's less of a technology problem, but I think it's more of I think Shweta touched on it. I don't think we are immune to this either, is that I think there are established ways of kind of operating. There are established ways of how stuff gets prioritized. And I think there is just a very different way of operating. And I think that's where the challenge is. So I think when we work with companies, startups, or other technology providers, I think we are much more receptive to organizations and kind of partners who understand that the technology is one component of the three-legged stool, right? So it's the people and the process part. And to the extent that companies that we engage with can help us figure out, yes, you bring an amazing technology that is 10x better than anything else out there. But then can you work with us to figure out how do we onboard this, right? Without having, I equate it to Jenga, right? It's not like we can take this one out and put your technology in here, right? There's a superstructure and an edifice that is operational and that's working. Can you work with us to actually make that transition? What is your secret sauce outside of the technology to make that?
Love the analogy. Shweta, Google Cloud works with a ton of startup vendors as partners. And you've yourself worked with so many startups as an advisor and as an investor as well. What are some unmet needs surfacing through your network of healthcare enterprise stakeholders? And the founders in the audience would love to learn about areas of opportunity that are coming up amongst your network of CIOs, CTOs within the life sciences and healthcare space.
Okay, so that's a bit of a loaded question. I think that so there's a handful of things I could probably share here. So one is, let me answer the first part of your question, which is around, what are some of the things that we're seeing, right? So I've already given you a little bit about what we're seeing from some of the things that have surfaced because of this year. So what we're seeing is, as different industries, and even within healthcare and life sciences, or even within life sciences, you're seeing different parts of the industry coming to us. We're seeing that forecasting is being a massive challenge. Again, be that biopharma, medtech, and all of that. They're thinking about how the pandemic is disrupting their different trials, renegotiating contracts, and all of that, right? So we've touched upon that at a very high level. But I think as it relates to the type of maybe information that the startups are very interested in, as we're looking at different partnerships or different ways how we can partner with some startups and such, it's ones that are growing very quickly and are differentiated in the market, right? And so I think that's one of the areas, right? Google, we're actually very keen and open to partnering with the ecosystem, particularly in the startup space. But it really does require, whether these tech startups, it does require having a very differentiated market strength. And I think for whom we can very clearly articulate and create what I would consider best-in-class products when you combine Google technology with the startup's own IP. So those are two, again, very, very broad sweeping statements. But in terms of what we're looking for these tech startups as they're thinking through how to engage, but also how to think about the industry. I think those are the two areas that I would highlight for life sciences. And I think there's a third question in there that you kind of threw in, Apurv. So let me know if there's anything else that I can share. Otherwise, I can go ad nauseum about what we see in the industry.
Yeah, I think the other dimension was, I think one dimension for you was around Google Cloud's lens, right? Like, what do you guys look for? But the other is also from the point of view of, like, if you're talking to CIOs and CTOs within life sciences today, what do they see as like one or two areas where they are actively looking to engage with startups?
Yep. I think right now what we're seeing is hands down, when I'm thinking about areas, the way in my world, what I'm thinking about is from a vertical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And hands down, the number one thing that has come about this year has really been around supply chain efforts, right? Having that visibility. So that's just one area as I'm thinking about, and what, again, this shift was already happening within life sciences, but 2020 has brought about, these CIOs are also thinking about less about their core infrastructure challenges and more about what are the business challenges that they're looking to solve for, which then can be in turn addressed by some of the partnerships that they're bringing along.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did want to also highlight one of the things that Vishy had said was around, and I think we're kind of saying the same thing, but about some of the old ways of working or the historical context of how decisions were made. I think what we're seeing is that these CIOs and CTOs are also starting to maybe step out of maybe the traditional definitions of these roles and really start to think about, from the business perspective, the impact, right? So it's not just about what's going to cost me the least or how can I get it done by speed. It's not just about cost and speed anymore, but it is really about looking at the impact. I've noticed that these CIOs, CTOs, and quite frankly, CDIOs, right? These even in the digital space are really looking at, are now being accountable for things that are beyond maybe some of the traditional things that a CIO would be accountable for. And so because of these changes in accountabilities, we're also seeing a difference in the way that they're interacting with the rest of the business, right? They are now becoming much more ingrained in the business. So to that end, as you think about, as those who are listening are thinking about how do they engage, I would actually very much look at some specific sectors within the industry that your technology or startup has an application for, and really think about how that's differentiated. Because what we're seeing from the life sciences industries, as the CIOs, CTOs, et cetera, are talking to us, they're really trying to understand who are the differentiated partners in the ecosystem. Because right now, in some cases, it looks like a dime a dozen for certain areas.
Makes sense.
Apurva, if I can just piggyback on something that Shweta said, I think for us, as part of although we are going through a major technology transformation, we've been explicit in terms of the outcomes we want to drive, right? Absolutely, in terms of cost reduction and agility, yes, that's a given. But I think the one thing we've explicitly stated and communicated all the way up to our very senior leadership as an outcome is dramatically altering both the employee experience and the customer experience, right? Because I think your customer experience is only as good as the employee experience is, right? And so having that as one deliberate and intentional outcome as part of the transformation, I think to me it sends a very big signal, and it kind of gets to the point Shweta made, which is altering the role of the CIO and the CTO away from just technical milestones and some financial metrics around cost, et cetera, but just saying, hey, this is about reducing the distance between the customer and like us and making that as frictionless.
Makes a lot of sense. And Vishy, just to like add to that point, and just a follow-up question on that point, help me. So AT&T is approached by like hundreds of startups every year, and you choose to focus with a handful of them at the end of the funnel, if I may call that. And typically for like enterprise sales process, as most companies talk about, it's a 9 to 12 month cycle. And you having been an operator, a startup operator before, and now an exec, you try to be more efficient with people's times, with the founders' times. What is the tech buying process at your end, so that like founders who are listening in can understand what AT&T's process looks like?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I have an easy button here that describes our tech buying process. Now, look, I think there's a standard procurement process, right? But I think there is a part of the ongoing transformation is that and folks can get in touch with me. My information is available. Apurva, you can. I think we try to be very respectful of founders' times and startups' times, because our operating principle, at least for me and my team, is that the most precious kind of currency that entrepreneurs have is time. So we are not going to subject you to kind of 6 months of just ongoing back and forth. I think there are very specific problems that we have. And I think if in the first couple of meetings we can't kind of find the intersection between what you have and the problem we have right now, we are okay saying no. For whatever reason, it may be just the fit doesn't exist, or we're still not comfortable with exactly what you have, or we run into an issue where, for example, Apurva, where the team is very early in their process. And I have no illusions at the scale at which we operate that we can give the founding team whiplash, because there is still a prevailing kind of thing about like, hey, our needs are unique, and so then you become a kind of a one-trick pony. You build something for AT&T, but then you have your TAM just disappeared in some sense, right? So we want to be mindful of that as well. So I think I would say I think we have a very well-established process. You work, we work with you guys and a bunch of other, other peers of yours in the industry. So we have a pretty good kind of process to run that through, and we try to, to the extent that we can actually say no sooner. That's probably the biggest part of that kind of process. Now, obviously, we can do things like field trials and proofs of concept very, very quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that when it comes to the actual kind of the bigger contract, et cetera, I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. That's part of the supply chain and procurement process at any large company. But I think we can try and kind of reduce that pretty dramatically, right? By creating a case that says that, yeah, we need this because it's got, it's been proven out. We did a field trial, we did a POC, we scoped it, we defined the outcomes before the POC. So that's what we've done. And we've had pretty good traction with a lot of companies doing it that way. This doesn't by any way says you're subverting the process, right? You're just accelerating it pretty dramatically.
Sounds great. And I know we're just scratching the surface, and we can continue talking about it for hours. I've been told to kind of wrap up the discussion. So I have one parting question for both of you, and I think that'll also be a key learning thing for a lot of founders who've dialed in. Could you talk about one or two companies that really have fascinated you, a startup that's fascinated you, and why, in terms of working with you? Or in terms of what you've seen working with an enterprise, like what really worked with for that company, and why did it work that way? Would be great to get your thoughts, Vishy, maybe in the context of AT&T. Shweta, could be in the context of Genentech, or while you've seen a partner of Google Cloud do really well. One example each would be super helpful.
Oh, okay. So I'm not trying to have to think real hard, Apurva.
And this could also give a flavor to people around how the team worked with you, what the product was like, and then why did AT&T love working with that company?
Yeah. So I would say I think this might be a bit of a cop out, because I think it is. Instead of naming names, right? I would say here are some common characteristics, and this is probably a bit of a rehash, but I'll build on something that I said earlier. I think this is not to trivialize kind of the technical innovation that a lot of startups bring. But I think for us, it's, yes, that's necessary, but that's not sufficient, right? I think, are you willing to kind of listen to us and work with us? Because, I think one of the challenges, especially as you try, I think this is my kind of feedback to a lot of startups, is breaking into the large enterprise space is tricky because they're brownfields to the nth degree. And I think greenfield versus brownfield, I think it's so different that I think unless the startup is willing to engage in that kind of mutual learning process, and I know time is always cramped, it's never enough, but are you open enough to say, okay, you know what, it's not a clean slate, right? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff, and so you have to then say, will you work with us to find one place where we can change this? and trust us as AT&T that we understand the players and the dynamics well enough that we will do the heavy lifting for you, but then you'll have to work with us and, bring any experiences that you have in terms of, I keep going back to, it's the culture and the ways of working that are usually the impediment. So the most amazing experiences that I've had with startups is ones which recognize that, right? Because trust me, the complexity and the scale of the problems that a company like AT&T, I think most startups would love to get their hands on, right? But I think in exchange, right, and I think it's a fair exchange, is all we ask is that you be open enough to actually work with us to actually attack those. Because you can't solve all of it. You have to pick the right kind of pieces and then the dominoes start
makes a lot of
falling.
sense. Like the brownfield point is super insightful, because like many people, when they have a startup customer or a cloud native customer, it's like their first application, versus in your case, it's like, again, fitting in that jigsaw puzzle, and where do you fit in? I think you called it Jenga the right way. It's dependency versus a jigsaw puzzle. So Shweta, I'll move it to you. Which company, or no name, but characteristics, whatever works best for you.
Yeah, I'm going to just probably also cop out just at the risk of highlighting somebody and then not highlighting somebody else. But I will, everything that Vishy said is absolutely accurate. I think one of the successful ways I've seen, and again, this comment is actually not just coming from my experiences at Google, but also at prior in the healthcare and life sciences industry, is that looking at working with these startups has to be a partnership, right? This is not a vendor relationship. This is not right. So don't look at them as vendors. And so when we're bringing a startup in, our intention is really to be as transparent as possible. The more that we're able to work with the startup, right? It's about thinking about going through the processes together and not just slapping a technology and hoping that they can help us sell it, or where it's just going to work on its own. I think another area of focus, or where I've seen it successful rather, is about being able to very clearly articulate your value proposition. And quite frankly, it's slightly tweaked depending on who you're talking to in the industry. It's not just a one sentence that you give every time, because where I've seen our partners trip up, and again, this is not a Google comment, this is a comment from my experiences, is when we're going together and have a challenge of being able to articulate the use cases that would be beneficial from whom. And it's not, again, coming back to some of the comments I said earlier, it's not about saving money or it's not about your time, but actually articulating the value proposition, as opposed to just trying to say we can do it faster, we can do it better. And then my one pet peeve that I will always call out is we always have a red flag for any startup that comes to us that says that they don't have a competitor in this space. So that, that is one where we're an automatic red flag that gets raised. So I think that's another area, is being self-aware, I guess, is probably just a very basic, more of a personality trait, if you will, for the company.
Very well said, Shweta, and that kind of wraps it up. I think your point around like different value propositions for different people and kind of what resonates with them, linked to your technology and your core tech itself. You don't have to change your core tech, but it means different things for different stakeholders if you're a multi-stakeholder organization. And I think that's where product marketing helps a lot. And a lot of companies don't value that as much early on, but product marketing and defining the right value proposition and understanding from a product lens perspective what those use cases look like is super important for early stage companies. And that wraps up our panel for today. And super grateful for all the audience over here, and especially to Vishy and Shweta for joining us today and sharing their experiences and insights. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see some of you for the partner office hours, which is next. And for the rest of you, have a good lunch and come back at 1 for our conversation about scaling go-to-market, which is happening in one of our main stages. Thank you. Thanks, Shweta.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks.